Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dive into your sources, pull out the critical knowledge, maybe find a few surprises. Today, our mission is focused on a really data-packed perspective. It's titled, Solar Photovoltaics is Ready to Power a Sustainable Future.
Yeah, and that title, it's not just wishful thinking. It's making a strong technical case. This study argues that, well, hitting that crucial 1.5 degrees Celsius climate goal demands a massive, fast energy shift. And crucially, they're pointing to solar PV as, the mature technology. It's cost-effective, it's ready to go, ready to lead this transformation right now.
Yeah, and what really jumps out right away is this tension the study talks about. I mean, PV's success has been incredible. Just in the last decade, more global capacity installed than any other power source, over 600 gigawatts cumulative by the end of 2019. That's huge. But then you look at these influential future energy scenarios, and they just dramatically underestimate PV's role. Why? Why are they so pessimistic?
Well, that gap is exactly what we're digging into today. Our analysis of this study, it's going to look at the drivers, the financial and technical reasons behind PV's success. We'll tackle those common misconceptions, especially around land and materials, debunk them really. And finally, look at the strategies, the innovative ways needed to get solar properly integrated into the whole energy system.
Okay, let's get straight into that disparity then, because the numbers, they're pretty startling. This study says the tech is ready now. Multi-terawatt scale deployment.
It absolutely is. And often the source of this, let's call it quantitative underestimation, it traces back to these things called integrated assessment models, or IAMs. These are used by major groups, even informing IPCC reports. So if you look at the scenarios in the IPCC 1.5 degrees C special report, the average was only about 12.5 petawatt hours per year from PV by 2050.
12.5 PWH. Okay, that sounds like a lot. But how does that stack up against what the solar industry itself thinks is achievable?
It's a huge disconnect, a massive one. The PV community's own estimates, they're projecting anywhere from, say, 41 PWH up to maybe 96 PWH per year by 2050. So we're talking potential projections that are, up to 8 times higher than what these big climate models are assuming right now.
Wow, 8 times. That's not just a slight difference. It feels like a systemic issue. So why? Why are these fundamental models so cautious, so pessimistic, when the reality of PV growth has been so, well, aggressive?
The study points to 2 main problems in how these models work. First, and this seems the most fixable, is just outdated cost assumptions for solar PV. The models haven't kept up with the manufacturing learning curve, the price drops. Second, and this is a bit more technical, they often put in these artificial constraints, limits on how much renewable energy the grid can handle. And they also assume really low levels of electrification in other areas, like transport or heating.
And the danger there, the practical risk of underestimating PV, is that these scenarios end up relying more on technologies that are, well, much less certain, right? Like BECCS.
Yes, exactly. Bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. The study suggests that models leaning heavily on BECCS often show it contributing as much primary energy, sometimes even more, than solar PV by 2050. And this is despite, big questions about logistics, environmental impacts, whether we can even get enough sustainable biomass at that scale. It feels like a risky, expensive bet when you've got a mature, cheaper technology already leading the way.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The plummeting costs, the accelerating technology, this study really pinpoints these as the key drivers, the reason PV is ready.
The cost reduction story is, well, it's historic and pretty predictable now, actually. The solar PV modules, they've kept up a learning rate of about 23% since way back in 1976. And what that means is every time the total global installed capacity doubled, the cost dropped by 23%.
That's a remarkably consistent curve over decades.
It is, but here's something fascinating. That learning rate actually accelerated to 40% if you just look at the data from 2007 onwards. And the speed up, it's directly linked to standardization, to high throughput manufacturing, mostly driven by huge production scale-up in China. Once the early silicon shortage was sorted out, that industrial scaling just slashed capital costs.
Right, and this history makes those model assumptions look, well, almost negligent. The study notes many IAMs setting capital costs for solar plants in 2050 are close to, or even shyer than, €1 per watt. But the average cost in 2019 was already under that €0.995 per watt, and the lowest cost achieved was way down at €0.618 per watt. Their 2050 projection was basically beaten years ago.
It really highlights how crucial it is to update those model inputs urgently. And the key point this study makes is that the tech innovation isn't stopping, it's not plateauing, it's actually ensuring these high learning rates keep going.
So let's look at those innovations. What's happening at the cell level?
Okay, cell level. Silicon solar cells are still king, over 95% of the market. And we've seen super fast adoption of things like PERC technology. That stands for Passive Emitter Rear Cell. Basically helps capture more light. That hit 65% market share back in 2019, pushing average module efficiency over 20%, 20.3% to be exact.
And beyond PERC, what's the next step coming into commercial use now?
They mentioned TOPCon, tunnel oxide passivated contact. It's sort of the next evolution for silicon cells. It gives another percentage point or so in efficiency pretty quickly. It promises a path towards, say, 22% or higher commercial efficiencies. And then beyond that, you get the record breakers. Really exciting stuff. Silicon cells hitting 26.7%. And these new tandem cells layering perovskite on top of silicon, they've reached 29.1%. That clearly shows a path to commercializing 30% efficient modules, less area needed for the same power.
Okay, that covers the tiny scale of the cell, but system-level stuff matters too, right? How the panels are actually deployed to get more energy out and cut the cost per kilowatt hour.
Absolutely. Think bigger picture. How the panels are installed. Single-axis tracking, where panels follow the sun across the sky, that's already about 30% of the market. It gives a significant boost to the energy you generate, especially matching demand in the morning and evening peaks. And then there's bifacial solar cells. These capture light from both sides of the panel. They're at 20% market share now and expected to grow a lot more.
And the study also really zeroes in on these soft costs, things like financing, getting permits, labor, says they're critical for future cost drop.
Exactly. Soft costs vary hugely around the world. In
Right.
places where permitting is quick and easy, the total system cost is much, much lower. That variation, it's actually a good sign. It means there's massive room for improvement everywhere else as the bureaucracy kind of catches up with the technology. The lowest soft cost anywhere set the target for the rest of the world.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Busting those big myths about scaling up PV. You always hear worries about materials running out of stuff or paving over the planet.
Yeah, those come up a lot. On materials, this study is, frankly, very reassuring. Material availability is just not a real constraint for the dominant silicon cells. Silicon comes from sand. It's one of the most abundant elements on Earth.
But what about metals like silver, used for conducting electricity in the cell? Isn't that a potential bottleneck or maybe a risk if supply is concentrated somewhere?
It's a fair question people raise. But silver use per watt has dropped significantly. That's thanks to rising cell efficiencies and making the contacts thinner. The study notes that even if silver did become an issue, you could use copper or aluminum instead. But maybe more importantly, the whole industry is moving towards a circular economy model. Existing recycling methods. They already recover over 75% of the modules, mass, the aluminum frame, copper, glass. And there are advanced processes that could get recovery rates up to like 94% for silver, 97% for silicon. It's not a use once and throw away resource model. It's circular.
Okay, good. Now let's tackle the land issue. Covering vast areas with panels, it sounds potentially damaging. But the study says land use won't stop PV expansion at scale. Can you quantify that a bit?
Yeah, the study gives a really clear, simple number for perspective. To supply all current global electricity consumption just with solar PV, it would only require covering about 0.3% of the world's total land area. That's an astonishingly small footprint when you think about powering the entire globe.
0.3%. That is small. But
Yeah.
where is that 0.2%? Does the study talk about, potential conflicts or impacts if you convert even that much land?
It does, but it pivots really strongly towards these innovative dual-use strategies. Ways to use the land for more than one thing, avoiding conflict, like floating PV or FPV, putting panels on water bodies, like hydro reservoirs. Saves land, obviously. But those reservoirs can also act like big virtual batteries for the grid. And maybe the most promising is agrivoltaics, combining solar panels and farming on the same land.
Agrivoltaics, how does that work without just blocking all the sun from the crops?
Well, the arrays are designed differently, maybe elevated higher or spaced out more, depending on the specific crop underneath. And this dual-use approach, it's shown multiple benefits. The panels can act as windbreaks, reduce water evaporation, keep soil moisture up in dry areas, and sometimes they even increase crop yields because the shade protects certain plants from intense heat. So land use conflicts can actually become symbiotic relationships.
That leads us nicely into the next big challenge this study focuses on, grid integration. The study seems quite critical of models that use really coarse time resolution, like annual averages.
Yeah.
Mentions the primes model specifically.
Yeah, that low-resolution modeling is a huge problem. It's a systematic hurdle. Because these models can't see the hour-by-hour or even second-by-second fluctuations in supply and demand, they end up imposing these really severe, unrealistic constraints. They might add artificial integration costs that get crazy high, like over $100 per megawatt hour for higher solar shares.
Yeah.
Or they just set arbitrary limits, like saying renewables can't go above 30% penetration. It just completely handcuffs solar in the results.
So the fix is much higher resolution, like hourly modeling, plus this idea of sector coupling. What are the key ways the study identifies for handling PV's variability?
It lays out a whole toolkit of strategies, really, working across different timescales. For balancing things hour to hour or within the day, we use stuff we already have, electric batteries, pumped hydro storage, and increasingly demand-side management, getting consumers involved, shifting their energy use patterns to match when the sun is shining brightest.
Okay, and what about grid stability, the moment-to-moment stuff, when you replace those big spinning traditional generators which provide inertia with PV?
Right. For that sub-second stability, we have tech solutions now. Things like grid-forming inverters and synchronous condensers. Basically, these advanced power electronics can act like the traditional generators, mimicking the inertia and stability provided by that heavy rotating machinery. And this isn't just theory, it's actually being implemented successfully.
Can you give us a real-world example? Something concrete.
Yeah, this is really crucial evidence.
Right.
South Australia, it's a grid that's pretty isolated geographically. It recently ran for a whole hour using only PV electricity, 100% solar. That kind of test case proved we can manage frequency, manage voltage stability, even when the sun is the sole power source for a period. The literature backs this up. There's no known technical limit, no magic percentage above which the system just becomes impossible to operate.
Okay, let's talk more about sector coupling. How does all this cheap solar electricity help other parts of the economy? And how do those sectors, in turn, help stabilize the grid for PV?
It creates this really valuable synergistic demand. It's critical. Think of the whole energy system less like separate pipes, more like a single flexible sponge. When solar generation is cheap and abundant, you don't just waste the excess. You soak it up by electrifying other sectors.
Like transport.
Exactly. Transport's a big one. Rooftop PV helps charge electric vehicles directly. And then those EV batteries, potentially through vehicle-to-grid or V2G systems, can provide short-term storage back to the grid when needed. For heating, cheap solar makes electric heat pumps much more competitive against natural gas. And things like refrigeration demand, especially for businesses, that lines up really well in time with peak solar output during the day.
What about the really tough areas? Heavy industry, for example.
That's where indirect electrification using that low-cost solar power becomes truly transformative. You can use solar electricity to produce green hydrogen through electrolysis, replacing hydrogen made from natural gas, which has a big carbon footprint. That clean hydrogen is vital for making things like ammonia, fertilizers, even for green steel production. And you can take that solar-derived hydrogen, maybe combine it with CO2 captured from industry, and produce synthetic methane or even sustainable aviation fuels.
And when the models actually include all these realistic pieces, the hourly detail, the dual-use land strategies, the detailed sector coupling, what happens to the results?
The whole picture flips completely. The study demonstrates that when models incorporate these real-world innovations and possibilities, solar PV doesn't just look like a contributor. It emerges as one of the main cost-optimal energy sources globally. The projected shares jump way up, potentially reaching 68% of total global electricity generation in optimal scenarios.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? The conclusion from this study seems crystal clear. PV is dynamic, its costs are still falling, it's not really held back by materials or land in the grand scheme, and we have the smart strategies like sector coupling to integrate it effectively.
Absolutely. The message to modelers, to policymakers, is unambiguous. Future energy scenarios have to properly capture the real potential of this technology. That means updating those stale cost assumptions, dramatically improving the time resolution in the models. Otherwise, they'll just keep generating climate scenarios that are unnecessarily expensive and, frankly, dangerously over-reliant on technologies that are far less proven and ready than solar PV.
That's a powerful call to action. Definitely needs to be heard. And let's end with maybe a thought about something else the study touches on, the social benefits of PV's modularity. We often talk gigawatts, but this is important too. Because PV is modular, yes, it allows rapid scale-up in developed nations on rooftops and utility scale, but crucially, it lets the 860 million people currently without electricity access kind of climb the ladder. They can start small with basic solar lighting and then scale up to more power, more appliances as their income allows. It's a development solution just as much as a climate solution.
A truly global solution, equitable and scalable.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the perspective. Solar photovoltaics is ready to power a sustainable future.